What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm P. Rodriguez, and today we're going to be refreshing the PBD podcast thumbnail artwork. I love the PBD podcast. If you don't know anything about it, essentially Patrick Bet-David, he's an entrepreneur. He is a businessman. He's kind of an alpha male type of guy. I love his content. He talks about culture war issues, provides a lot of value, business, entrepreneurship, all of it. But one of the things that's always struck me as a designer is how his artwork doesn't quite reflect like that gritty sort of alpha male personality that he brings to the table. And so I want to redo the artwork. I'm not going to redesign it from scratch, but I want to refresh it and kind of breathe some fresh air into it. I think it's important to do that. And honestly, full transparency, I'm going to share this with him on Twitter and see, hopefully he can see this video and be like, yo, this designer did a pretty good job. And like, this is my journey of working with him. So tag PBD podcast down below. Help me work with Patrick Bet-David. And I love you guys. Thank you for watching. We're not going to waste any time. Let's jump right in. Before we do that, can you like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, all at I'm Pete Rodriguez. Let's jump right into this tutorial right now. All right, let's go. The first thing we're going to want to do when, designing this new thumbnail is to open up a fresh Photoshop file. All right, so look, so 1920, we want to make sure all this stuff is set correctly. So we have 1920 by 1080 at 150 resolution. I know a lot of people say 144. It used to be 72 DPI. And, we've moved away from that. We've gotten higher capacity processing and machinery, so we can actually handle 144 to 150. I always do 150, and we want to make sure it's set to RGB, being that this is going to be artwork that lives solely in the digital world. So I'm going to create this artboard and make myself a little smaller over here so you don't have to see me too much the whole time. But here's our artboard, okay? We want to essentially refresh the thumbnail. So I have some PNGs and some JPEGs that I want to use here in this folder, in this PBD redesign folder here. And I already have, in full transparency, I have a picture that I screenshotted from a video of PBD podcast. And then I also grabbed one of Andrew Tate and I edited those PNGs beforehand just to save some time. So I sharpened them up a bit. When you're doing YouTube thumbnails, you got to remember that this stuff is going to be very small. And so you want to make sure, don't be afraid to hyper sharpen up the image. That's going to translate well, especially when you're viewing these images at such a small size. So I have the old artwork here that I'm going to bring in, or I should say the current artwork. I'm just bringing this in as a reference point. And you'll see that it's just very simple, right? They have like this texture red and then they have blue. So I like the red. I think the whole Valuetainment brand is red. The blue to me feels just odd. And like the white outline here is just a little bit, I don't know. I don't want to be disrespectful. I just think it's a little bit odd. And it doesn't quite match the aesthetic to me of Patrick Bet-David. I think he's just this alpha male. He's strong. He has strong opinions. And I want something that's going to feel that has weight, a design that has weight to it. So I'm going to leave this here. I'm going to uncheck the eye so that disappears. I want to keep that in the file though for reference. We can kind of look back and compare as we move forward. And then you can see here that there's just like a gradient too. One last thing, gradient, and then the title of the guest. And so I think the title of the guest should be larger so people can actually see it. And just again, we're going to play with the colors. So off the jump, I am going to just bring in a shape. Okay, I'm going to bring in a shape. I went to my shape tool and you can see I have a navy blue. One of the things I just said I don't like is this light blue color. So I actually am going to keep this navy blue color. I think it's nice. I'm going to duplicate the shape because we're going to use obviously red and blue. It's a refresh, so we're not going to stray too far away from the original design. I'm going to hit Option click if you're on Mac, and you can duplicate this shape without, needing to go through the menu and all that sort of jazz. So I have two shapes here essentially, and I want to make sure that there's no stroke on these. So it looks like if I zoomed in, there probably is a stroke. So I just took that off of both shapes. Obviously, one of them needs to be navy blue. The other one, it needs to be red. I'm just going to make up a red here. Doesn't need to be anything crazy. I'm just going to turn the shape on a corner, on an angle, and get it to the point, get it to where, wherever I want it to be. I'm going to turn this one as well, kind of get it in the same spot. Again, when you're working, like, Don't let people tell you how to do something. In Photoshop, one of the things I learned early on, and I have a degree in this, there's a million ways to get the same results. And so people will say, well, use this, do this shortcut, do that. And again, shortcuts, I'm a huge shortcut like advocate, but just don't let people discourage you, because at the end of the day, there's a million ways to do the same thing, specifically in Photoshop and really all the Adobe softwares. So I want these shapes to kind of hit the corner of my artboard. And then I think this stuff is not going to even be visible by the time we're done with it. So that's our base. I'm going to delete this background. I'm going to relabel my layers, because the best workspace is an organized workspace. So I'm going to say blue background and copy that. I'm going to rename this one red background. All right, guys, what do you think? We're done. All right, pretty good, pretty good. Actually, I'm going to flip these, edit. I'm going to go here to edit, transform, and flip horizontally, because you can see on this how the red is at the bottom and the blue's on top. So I'm going to actually just do that to create, I don't know why I just spun that. Just to, again, for consistency's sake. If that's how they like it, there's some things like I'm envisioning Patrick PBD coming to me and saying, hey, I like some of these things. I want you to refresh it. I don't want you to redesign it from scratch. So I want a little bit more red rather than the blue. So more red than blue is important to me. Okay, now I think we need some texture. Something that I think this is missing is texture. So I'm just opening up my files here. I'm going to go to some textures. I have some saved textures from different things that I have used in the past in my designs. So I just have some photocopy stuff. I like some of this. I don't know if it's going to be the right fit. Let's see, film grain. Shout out to all the designers out there with tons of folders on their computer with free textures that you've downloaded over the years. Shout out to you. Oh, see, like that's kind of cool. You got some little, let's throw one of these back here, okay? And we're gonna enlarge that and send it to the back. Like, one of the things I like to do is always just come back to this layer styles, or like there's these different styles over here that will change the effect of whatever color you have there, essentially, if that makes sense. And so I always go there and just kind of like work my way down the list and see what happens. It's a nice way to stay curious while you're designing. Again, just work your way down the list, kind of use your arrow tool and just scroll down the list and see what happens. I know PBD does have some texture in the original artwork here. There's like looks like some texture happening. It's very subtle though. It's mostly just solid color, but if we could stay true to that, that'd be kind of cool. So if we did something like that, I'm gonna make sure that these are on the same plane. So I think that's fine, because everything else, a lot of the imperfections are gonna be hidden by different graphics and stuff by the time we're done. So we don't really have to stress too much about getting things right, but I do like the way that this has some texture now. All right, let's see what happens with the blue. Is that worth exploring at all, or we can just keep that as is? Yeah, you know what? Let's add the texture to the blue too. It's not gonna hurt. Okay, so let's add in our people now. Obviously, when it comes to artwork, you have the people are what people are drawn to and they're scrolling, faces, like reactions. You see people in the thumbnails doing like this or all that kind of stuff. And I think we want to make sure that we're staying consistent with that. So I'm going to bring PBD in. Again, full transparency, I already edited these photos. So these photos I sharpened them up like crazy. And I also played with the color a little bit. I just screenshot. So usually in this instance, I'll go to the video of a previous episode or something. I'll screenshot it, and then I'll bring it into either Adobe Background Remover, which is a great resource if you want to mask something really quickly, or now I believe Photoshop, you can do it directly through Photoshop, which is subject select, and it does a really good job at just masking out your subject. And in this case, for YouTube thumbnails, I definitely wouldn't overthink it. Like, it doesn't need to be a perfect mask. It's just happening so quickly and fast paced that you just don't want to spend too much time, masking stuff. So one thing to keep in mind, I have this picture of the top G himself. And one thing to keep in mind here is that I'm going to bring up my rulers palette. So you can see the rulers coming in and out there, but it's Command R for the rulers. You always want to make sure your subjects are kind of on the same height. You don't want one to be too small or one to be too big, or like they're just battling and competing with each other. I think both of them, especially two pretty influential guys like this, You want to kind of give respect to both of them and sort of like make sure they're on the same plane, if you will. So I edited Top G as well, made sure he was good, looking good, and that was really effective. These were done in Adobe Background Remover. You can see, again, they're not perfect, but they're good enough, guys. Remember, this is going to be viewed like this, right? Like that's the scale it's going to be viewed at. And so it doesn't need to be, you know, too crazy. I am going to brighten up Andrew a little bit here. Alrighty. And I'm actually going to go into edit, image adjustments, selective color. And I'm going to remove some of the magenta in his skin. I think it's getting a little bit too pink in comparison to PBD. Okay. Now I need to add, I think, again, this still feels like I like the texture. I think it's has more depth, but I think it still feels a little bit like not enough going on, not enough visual interest. So I have these clouds that I want to play with. I think if I turn these to the right layer style, they could be very cool. Again, right now, I went straight to my layers palette. I brought the clouds in from my, you know, Finder window, and I go straight to my styles and look at what happens when I do stuff, right? Is there anything cool happening? Is there anything fun, sort of like this? Whoa, right? Like subtle clouds in the background. I like that. I like that a lot. I like it a lot. Okay, so I'm gonna command, if you want to send a layer to the back. Right now, the clouds are sitting on top of both of our subjects, and we don't want that. So I'm gonna hit command open bracket, and that's gonna send it backwards. You can see it working its way down the layer palette there, right? So in this case, I think I'm gonna have the clouds sitting right above our red and blue shapes, and that just gives it a little bit something else, right? Like without it, here's it without. Oh, but now there's depth. Now there's something back there. Maybe it's their cigar smoke. Who knows? It doesn't matter, but it's there and it has presence and it's impactful. Now, one of the things that I want to do is bring in the Valuetainment logo. I think that's something that would be nice to have. I don't think the whole Valuetainment needs to be there. So perhaps I'm just gonna like make a version of this. I'm gonna rasterize this. You could rasterize this and then delete the Valuetainment. I just want the icon of the lion. It's pretty much what I'm getting at. So you can rasterize it and delete Valuetainment, or you could simply mask off Valuetainment and keep that as well. Totally your call. I'm gonna delete it in this case because I know for sure that I just want the lion icon. I'm gonna center that in the space here. That's kind of centered. And then obviously now we want to start thinking about title. And when it comes to title, you have to think fonts. And when it comes to fonts, you have to think about typography and hierarchy, right? What's the biggest typeface? What's your secondary typeface? And that's something worthy of considering. So I have a font here. It's called Humane. I love this for like really condensed spaces, and it's just a really strong typeface. So I'm going to say, let's rock with this. It's kind of dope. All right, let's say Tate Unleashed. I think that was the name of their last podcast that they did. Tate Unleashed. Maybe it's something like that, right? Maybe Andrew Tate. Maybe it's Andrew Tate Unleashed. All right, now we have our title, right? We have our title. It's there. Now just be mindful again of your tracking. You want to make sure that your tracking's not crazy. For YouTube, I don't know. I don't want to mislead you. I just feel like people are going to scroll past thumbnails really quickly. So like track it well. Tracking essentially just means, by the way, the space in between each individual letter. Track it out well, but you don't need to go too crazy. I'm going to now make a secondary typeface called Unleashed. So Andrew Tate Unleashed would be the name of this podcast. And I'm going to change this. I want to give it some visual interest. So if I have Andrew Tate in a very high condensed typeface, I want to make this new one in a typeface that's maybe more wide to give contrast. So I think Termina is always like, I mean, that's a safe one, but I think it'll work in this instance. So there you go. If you want to have small typeface, I should say, I'm going to make this as bold as I can, or heavy even. If your fonts get small and you know that they're going to be viewed at a very small scale and things are getting tight, you always want to track those out pretty wide. It might feel extra if you track them out and put a lot of space in between letters like I'm doing, right? This is very tracked out. This is not tracked out at all. It might feel extra, but when it's at a small scale, it needs to be legible. And so when you track fonts out like that, it actually helps a lot with legibility. I am going to let's go with something like this. I like this. I'm going to maybe do a little bit less tracked. So like maybe 700. All right, cool. Maybe make that a little bit bigger so it's legible. All right, so we notice now that the font, we want to obviously be mindful of like Andrew and Patrick not getting too cut off, but the font is also struggling to stand out against the background, which I am not a gung-ho, drop shadow fan, but there are instances, I think in YouTube, where you need a good drop shadow in order for things to work. So here's my drop shadow, dialog box. I'm just gonna mess around with the opacity just to like make sure things are actually legible. I'm going to play with the distance, perhaps. I'm going to play with the spread, which is going to make it either spread out. The size of it will matter. So just kind of finessing things here just to make sure that things are looking good. I always add a little bit of noise to my drop shadows. It's just a design aesthetic choice. I like it. I think this is good. Again, it's a little heavy, but because there's a lot happening in the background, you want that so that everything pops. Now, don't go and redo that for Unleashed. All you have to do, you see the Andrew Tate here, right? Well, over here in your layers palette, you have effects. If you hold Option and click that effects, you can drag it and duplicate it right into Unleashed, right? So now you have both of those pieces of type, your title and your subtitle, both have essentially the drop shadow on it. Now I'm gonna mess with Unleashed a little bit because I don't think it needs to be as heavy as Andrew. Or the title essentially. I think Andrew Tate could be, yeah, that looks good. This is looking really nice. And again, I'm going to show you, I'm going to bring this existing or their current artwork to the top, and right? Like we're somewhere different now. We're in a different league altogether. This feels almost like playful. It's not childish or anything like that. It's just a little bit too playful for the content that I think PBD and his team do. And so we have the lion there. Now I want to incorporate the PBD podcast logo. I couldn't find that logo anywhere, so I'm just gonna really quickly like recreate the logo. And I think it's just like a font. So if I were to take this and type out PBD, I'm gonna track that in a lot, something like this maybe. Now I think they have PBD on its own, and then they have like a shape. So I'm gonna grab this, let's make this white, and let's make sure that there's no stroke on it. So essentially they have that. We're just gonna make sure that's aligned with the edges of the word, right? And then they have podcast sitting in here. So I'm actually gonna take this Andrew and duplicate it and type out podcast, and now I'm gonna scale that down drastically, and I'm actually gonna eliminate the drop shadow here on this because it's not necessary. I'm gonna make sure that this text right here is a different color so we can read it and it's legible. So it's not gonna stay this way, but now I'm gonna center it in that rectangle. So I'm just gonna click the text and then click the rectangle and then just center that vertically and horizontally. And then I'm gonna select my type and track it out. I think the way the logo looks is like it's pretty tracked out. So it would look something like this. Now, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna select my text here. So I have my text layer. I'm gonna hit Command and click that text layer, and that's going to add the little marching ants around my text. Now I'm gonna eliminate that, and I'm going to go to the rectangle and then mask it. And so now we have this little logo essentially. Again, I made this very quickly, but that's what the PBD podcast logo sort of looks like. So I'm going to take both of these, group them together, and just call it PBD logo. Now we have that. I'm going to center that in our thumbnail. See guys, now we're cooking. Now we're cooking with oil. Go here, drop that a little lower. I want to bring this Andrew Tate Unleashed title a little bit lower. I think it just needs to sit a little bit more centered, and then I'm going to increase the size a little bit, and then I'm going to pull PBD just a little bit back. I'm going to pull Andrew a little bit back just to make some room, some breathing room, and I'm going to make the lion here a little larger. So now we have that, and now I'm going to try to do like maybe one last texture or something to pull it all together, just to make sure that everything like is really cohesive. And one other thing that they have that I want to honor is this drop shadow among the bottom. I'm going to just add well, you know what? I'll say this, two things: a drop shadow along the bottom and some of this outline. I don't like the white specifically. I don't think it's a good look. So I'm going to add a dark background behind them, drop shadow to create some separation there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Let's turn off the old one, and I'm just going to grab, there's PBD there and top G. I'm going to make a layer that's sitting behind PBD and top G, and rather than just doing drop shadows on them, well, you know what? Maybe let me try doing a drop shadow. Okay, so I'm gonna take PBD and do a drop shadow on him, right? Yeah, that looks great to me. So I'm gonna make sure the angle is coming upright, and then I'm just gonna drop the opacity a little bit and perhaps even add a little bit more noise. So it doesn't need to be anything crazy, just something there to add some separation, having them pop off the page a little bit. And then I'm gonna just, again, copy this effect, the drop shadow effect, with Option click, drag that to top G. And because he's against the blue, I'm gonna make his a little bit darker. Something like that's not always the case, but in his case, he's against blue. So I'm gonna make his opacity, darker. And I'm probably going to change the angle of his. There we go. All right, I think the black feels more serious, which I like. I think it's a good look. So make sure that's centered. That looked a little bit off to me. So now I'm gonna do, like I said, that gradient that I was talking about. I'm gonna come up here, and rather than adding in a gradient from like the gradient thing, I'm actually just gonna paint one in. I'm gonna grab like this really deep blue and drop my opacity to about 50%. And I'm just gonna paint in a gradient down here. So again, really, really subtle, nothing serious. Now that I have that, I'm gonna just, again, go to my styles palette just to see what happens, because you never know, something really cool could happen and you're like, whoa. I'm gonna leave this one normal, but I am gonna drop it back a bit to like 80%, maybe 75%. And then I'm also going to make sure that it's behind the PBD podcast logo, because you can see right there, it's kind of like getting hidden. All right, so there you go, guys. What do you think? I mean, I can go ahead now and also add in like a paper texture or something that's gonna like give me a cool look. And maybe that's the final thing that we do here, is add in like, there's burnt paper, there's all sorts of different things that we can kind of mess around with. And actually it would be a kind of cool idea just to see what happens with paper, to have that in the background somehow. Yeah, like that's kind of cool if that was sitting behind top G, right? And then like we had that really large, I don't know. What do you guys think of that? Let me know in the comments. The sky is cracking back there. I don't know, maybe it's too much. All right, so let's go maybe one last overall texture for everything. All right, I'm gonna throw this one on. It's a black texture, it's paper, should be pretty cool. I'm gonna go over to my layer styles and just finesse it, see if there's anything kind of cool that comes out of it. I kind of like this. I think I'll just do something like that, just keep it subtle. That's the end game, y'all. I'm gonna make sure my titles and stuff, Unleashed and Andrew Tate, are sitting on the top just for prime like visibility. But outside of that, that is the artwork. Now I'm gonna compare. Let's compare, right? And like PBD, if you like this, do you like this more or do you like this more? What feels more valuetainment? What feels strong? What feels like it aligns with your brand? I think the answer is the one I made. So I want you to hire me. PBD, hey, look, all you guys viewing too, man. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it was meaningful and that maybe you can create one too. But I would be honored if you hired me. So guys, help me get hired by PBD. I want to do his thumbnails and take care of the graphics for him and the branding and all that kind of stuff. I just love branding, and I like to work with people who have a high level of value. Let me know in the comments down below if this was meaningful. Let me know if you have any tips for me, anything you can help me out with. And like I said, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at I'm Pete Rodriguez. Subscribe to the channel. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, you have a purpose and perspective unlike anything this world has ever seen. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.